Hey guys, so today we're checking out the ReadyLift 2.5-inch SST suspension lift kit, fitting all 2020 and newer JT Gladiators, excluding the Mojave models. Now this kit will be a great addition to your JT if you're looking for an easy way to gain some better performance for your Gladiator, whether that's some more ground clearance or fitting a bigger tire for better capability off-road. This will also be a great pick if you're looking to correct the factory rake, creating a more defined stance and a leveled out appearance to the truck. This kit will feature 2.5-inch spacers for the front and 2-inch spacers for the rear, gaining that additional ground clearance. I would like to note that these spacers here are going to be true to size at 2.5 inches in the front and 2 inches in the rear to provide that lift. Now that will raise the nose and the rear end, allowing you to crawl over obstacles a little bit easier, and will fit up to a 37-inch tire comfortably inside the wheel well. This kit will also feature some correcting components like longer end links and shock extensions for the front and bump stop extensions to maintain good drivability. The spacers, sway bars, and shock extensions will all be made of a tough steel material and have a durable black powder coat finish on top, resisting any rusting over time. Now each end link will also have a long-lasting bushing compared to the factory ones that tend to get brittle over time. The bump stop extensions will feature a billet aluminum construction with a clear anodized finish, and not to mention, the kit will come with everything that you need in order to get this installed on your JT with no drilling or modification required. This kit will be generally affordable for a lift kit, coming in at roughly $500. Now in shopping around for lift kits, usually the rule of thumb is the more components that they come with usually means that they're going to be a little bit pricier, and vice versa. This kit will be right in the middle, being pretty inclusive, but it's not going to include every single bell and whistle compared to some more expensive choices that will include shocks, track bars, and other correcting components. Now in this case, it's not 100% necessary. However, you can build off of this, so I think if you're trying to save a couple of bucks while still getting the stance and performance that you want out of your JT, then this is a great pick. This will be a 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter and will probably take you about a day to get the job done with some pretty basic hand tools. At this point, we can head over to the shop and check out a detailed breakdown of the install and what that looks like. That's going to wrap it up for me. Let's go ahead and jump into it.
Tools required for this install include an impact gun, an air gun, a drill, an electric ratchet, a couple different sized hand ratchets, 13, 14, 18, and 19 millimeter wrench, a 10, 14, 18, and 19, and 21 millimeter ratcheting wrench, a hanger, a pry bar, a 1/2-inch drill bit, a few different size extensions, a 14 millimeter swivel socket, a 10, 13, 14, 15, 18, 19, and 21 millimeter sockets, a swivel adapter, and then a 6 and 8 millimeter Allen bit, and a clip remover tool. What's up guys? Today we're installing a lift kit on our Gladiator, so let's get started. So our first step is to disconnect our bolt holding in our track bar on the passenger side. It's going to be a 21 millimeter bolt. It's right below our sway bar here. We have a tab with a welded nut on the back that's going to grab so we don't have to get a wrench on the back side. We'll just get our 21 millimeter socket on the front and remove our bolt. So now our next step is to remove our sway bar end link. We have an 18 millimeter bolt on the bottom and an 18 millimeter nut on the top. Now I'm going to be using an 18 millimeter ratcheting wrench for the bottom since there's not enough room for a gun. And then we can also remove our tab with our welded nut. And then for the top, we can just grab an 18 millimeter socket on an impact gun to take that nut off. And then we can just pop our end link out and do the same thing for the other side's end link. So next we can disconnect our lower shock mount. I'm grabbing an 18 millimeter wrench for our nut side and an 18 millimeter socket for our bolt side. And now we can go up to the top of our shock and disconnect our other bolt. It's gonna be that same 18mm socket. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So next we can pop out these two clips as well as this nut that's holding on our bracket, holding our brake line. So I'll grab a clip remover tool to pop these two clips out. And then we can grab a 15mm socket to remove our nut on the bracket. So next we can pop out this push clip up here, as well as our connector to our four-wheel drive actuator. So I'll get a clip remover tool for our top clip. And then we just need to pop out this little white tab and then press down on it to remove our connector. So I'm gonna grab that clip tool just to pop that out, and then we can disconnect that. So now we can begin to lower our pole jack to free up enough space to pull our spring out. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now with our spring removed, we can remove our rubber isolator, and we're gonna be installing our spring spacer. Now this little lip is gonna be facing downward, and then we can put our isolator back into that, slide it up. Now this isolator does sit snugly enough around our bump stop so that we don't have to worry about it falling down. So next we can grab our spring as well as our bump stop extender. Now the bored out hole is gonna be facing up, so we can slide this into our spring and then slide that into place. So now the next thing we're gonna do is remove this 10mm bolt so that we can pop this brake line bracket out of the way to have more room to access the nut we're gonna be putting on the bottom side of our bump stop extender. So I'll grab a 10mm ratcheting wrench to break this free. And then we can just twist that the rest of the way out by hand. And then we can just slide our bracket out of the way. So next we can install our hardware into our bump stop extension. We have an Allen head bolt that's gonna go through the top. And then we have a nut for the bottom side. So we'll reach in where we removed that bracket. Put that 8mm Allen bit on the top. And then on the bottom, I've got a 14mm swivel socket for our nut, and we can tighten that down. So now with our bump stop spacer installed, we can reinstall our brake line bracket. And we'll reinstall that 10mm bolt, and then we'll just snug that up with our 10mm ratcheting wrench. And then at this point, we can repeat the same process on the other side of installing our spring and our spacer. So now our next step is to install our shock mount extension. But before we do that, we have a hole at the bottom of our lower shock mount that we're gonna have to drill out to a 1/2 inch. So I've got my drill with a 1/2 inch drill bit, so we can go ahead and drill this out. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now we can install our lower shock extension bracket. So first we'll put that bolt, put that through, and then we can grab our factory nut for the other side. And then next we can install our included bolt with a flat washer. And we'll throw another flat washer up top. And then we can grab our nut. And then we can grab a 19mm wrench and a 19mm socket to tighten up our bottom. And then we can swap that out for an 18mm socket and an 18mm wrench to tighten down our shock bolt. So now we're ready to mount our shock. So we're going to be reusing our factory bolt at the top. Get that a few threads in, and then we can line up our lower shock mount. Now we've raised our axle back up so that we can line up our shock. And now once we poke our bolt through the other side, we can install another flat washer, followed by our nut. And then we'll take a 19mm socket and a 19mm wrench to tighten this down. And then at this point, we can repeat that same process on the other side. So now we can come back up to the top of our shock and tighten down our top bolt. We're going to be using an 18mm socket to tighten this one down. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now we can go ahead and reinstall our brake line bracket. And we'll tighten that up with a 15mm socket. And now we can reinstall our push clip and our harness connector. And then we'll press that white tab in to lock it into place. Now our next step is to reconnect our sway bar end link. So we'll slide the stud through our sway bar and get our nut on the back side. And then we can get our bottom mount into place. Slide our bolt from the outside in, and then add our nut. It's welded to a tab on the other side. And then we can grab our 18mm socket to tighten down our top nut and our bottom bolt. And then once we're done on this side, we can repeat the same process on the other side. So now moving on to the rear, we have to remove our shock. We've got a 21mm bolt and nut on the bottom as well as the top. So I'll grab a 21mm socket and a 21mm wrench to get these out. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now once we have our shock removed, our next step is to come up to our brake line bracket, remove this 10mm bolt, and pull our bracket out of the way. So our next step is to remove our sway bar end link. We have an 18mm nut on the bottom and an 18mm bolt on top. So we'll grab an 18mm socket for our top bolt. For our bottom ball joint, we're going to be using an 18mm ratcheting wrench with a 6mm Allen bit to prevent our ball joint from spinning. And then we'll grab our 18mm socket for our top bolt. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now we've lowered down our axle to get enough room to pull our spring out, so we can pull that out now. So our next step is to remove our brake caliper to relieve some of this tension on our lines. So I've got a caliper hanger I'm going to throw into this hole up here. And then we have two 10mm bolts that we can remove to remove our caliper. And then we can wiggle this out of place. And then we can hang that up on our caliper hanger. And then we can pop our ABS wire out of these little clips, because we do have a lot of slack on that one. And now once we have everything removed that we need to remove on this side, we can do that same thing on the other side. So now we can install our bump stop spacer. This is going to lay right down where our bump stop would contact. Now we have 4 holes. We're only going to be using 2 of them. And we also have a notch in the bottom that's going to be facing the front of the truck. So we'll lay that down. And then we'll grab our 2 13mm bolts with flat washers and drop them down into our holes. Now on the bottom, we're going to add another flat washer. Followed by our nut. And then we can grab our 13mm socket and a 13mm wrench to tighten this down. Next, we can grab our factory spring as well as our spring spacer. The slimmer side is going to be facing down, and we can push that into our isolator. And then we'll raise our spring up into place. So next we can reinstall our factory shock. So we'll get it into our top hole, throw our bolt through, and then get our nut on the other side. And then for the bottom, we're going to be raising our axle up with our pole jack until we can line up our bottom hole. Now once we have everything lined up, we can get our bolt installed, get our nut on the other side, and then we can grab our 21mm wrench and socket to tighten down our 2 bolts. So now we can reconnect our caliper as well as our brake line bracket and then install our new sway bar end link. Now we can tighten down all 3 of these bolts with a 10mm socket. And now we can install our new sway bar end link. We're going to be reusing our factory top bolt. And then on the bottom, we're going to be using our new bolts that are included in the kit with our smaller flat washer. And then on the other side, we'll get our larger flat washer and our nut. And then we can take a 19mm socket and 19mm wrench to tighten this up. And then we can use our 19mm socket to tighten down our top bolt. And then we can reconnect our 2 lines. And then at this point, we can repeat the same process on the other side. So now that we have the truck back on the ground, our last step is to reinstall our bolt into our track bar. And then we'll get our nut that's welded to a bracket on our backside and tighten that down. You might have to turn the steering wheel a little bit to the left or right just to get the holes to line up so we can get our bolt through. Now once we have our bolt hand threaded, we can take our 21mm socket to tighten that down. So that'll wrap up this review and install of the ReadyLift 2.5-inch SST suspension lift kit for your 2020 and newer Jeep Gladiator JT. Thank you for watching, and for all things Gladiator, keep it right here at extremeterrain.com.